Hey guys, I've seen a lot of people talk about Pharisees in the past, and I've realized that almost none of them actually know what a Pharisee is. I've heard people to call Pharisees the bad Jews. The best I've heard from these people that condemn Pharisees is that some of them say, rightly so, that Pharisees are a sect of Judaism. But when you ask them which sect, they either don't know or go back to saying the bad sect. Pharisees as a whole are not bad people. We should act more like Pharisees, not like the bad Pharisees, but like the good Pharisees. For there were Pharisees that did it right, and there were Pharisees that did it wrong. People think that Pharisees are bad people usually only look at that Jesus called them broods of vipers and hypocrites. But if you look at what Jesus actually said, he condemns them for specific things that they did. I'll now have to tell you what a Pharisee is. Pharisees are not actually a sect as much as a group of sects. I'm not 100% sure, but I believe there were 7 sects of Pharisees, 5 of which were legitimate. It's sort of like calling someone an Anglican. Which type of Anglican are they? There's an important difference though, because the Pharisees were a very legitimate sect. There was nothing illegitimate about the Pharisees. So I suppose it's more like calling someone a Franciscan. Are they a conventual? Are they an observant? Are they a Capuchin? Are they a Franciscan Friar of the Renewal, part of a different Franciscan group? Just like the Franciscans, the Pharisees had unifying characteristics among them. My source of all this information isn't the dictionary, but my dictionary actually is very good for what it said on the matter. It described Pharisees as a member of an ancient Jewish religious group who followed the oral law in addition to the Torah and attempted to live in a constant state of purity. What the Pharisees did was they copied certain things of the Old Testament for pious purposes. For example, I'm just going to make something up on the spot here. If David leaned on the pillar of the temple before entering and seeing a vision of God, they would lean on the pillar of the temple before entering it in order to honor what David did. They had many others, and most of them were from the Old Testament stories or from the old traditions of the Old Testament, but not all of them were like this. So what did Jesus complain about? Jesus complained about that these man-made traditions will place burdens upon people. To make matters worse, the Pharisees had different traditions from place to place. When the Pharisees complained about the disciples of Jesus not ritually washing their hands, this is a Pharisaic tradition, not a rule of the Old Testament. It is not mandated for all Jews. It is actually only mandated for the priests. As well, the Pharisees, that was a Pharisaic tradition of that town. The Pharisees in the disciples' towns may not have even practiced that, so it's not even a universal Pharisaic thing. So Jesus complained about making burdens on people unnecessarily and acting like they were rules. Jesus also spoke of following the traditions of men before and against the commands of God. If you have your own tradition, that's good, but it cannot supersede the commands of God. These are the traditions of men that Jesus condemns. Not that they exist, but that they were imposed on the average Jew without benefit. Both of those conditions have to be met in order for the tradition to be a bad thing. Jesus also condemns following traditions in such a way to act like they override the commands of God. Let me give you some examples from Catholicism. The rosary is wonderful, but it is technically a tradition of men. If you were to pray the rosary daily, that's wonderful and Our Lady would grant you special graces, but it's not mandatory. To begin to act as though it is mandatory would be wrong. It would also be wrong to say, oh, you don't have to go to Mass, just pray a rosary and you're fine. Keep in mind that the Mass is a command of God when you combine the remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy with the do this in memory of me. The rosary is wonderful, but it is not to be imposed, and it is not to be placed above the commands of God. As a final kicker to support the validity of traditions of men, I say that Jesus engaged in traditions of men. I'm pretty sure it's impossible not to engage in traditions of men. If you frequently show up at work at 8 a.m., that is a tradition of men. If you have a friend and every time you meet him you give him a bro hug, that is a tradition of men. If you read scripture daily, that's a tradition of men. Jesus engaged in traditions of men. I dare you to find the word synagogue in the Old Testament. It's not there. It's a tradition of men that was created because it was impossible to get all the Jews to the temple every Sabbath. Yet Jesus is sinless and engaged in this tradition of men. One final note that is most difficult to get across: traditions of men can, and often are, legitimately imposed upon people. The trick is that they are to be imposed in such a way that increases piety and is not burdensome. As Jesus says, the rules are made for us, not us for the rules. He says this specifically about the Sabbath. The Sabbath is made for man, not man for the Sabbath. But it actually goes for all the rules. The rules are made to help us. We are not made to help the rules. So the traditions of men must be imposed in a way that increases piety. That's why it's legitimate that we are called to do penance in this upcoming season of Lent, and actually during Advent and every Friday as well. These are meant to increase piety. And if you look at how much the Catholic Church imposes compared to how much the Pharisees imposed, you realize that we don't actually impose that much. Many religious orders have extra rules as well. For example, there are some orders that are called discalced orders because they do not wear shoes. This is only imposed upon those who freely join the order. If you're not a member of the order, it's not imposed upon you. Mother Teresa's sisters did daily Eucharistic adoration. She is quoted as saying, "If I cannot recognize Jesus in the Eucharist, how can I recognize him in the face of the other?" So it was something like that. This is wonderful, but it's only imposed upon those who freely join her order. There is the Daughters of Charity of St. Vincent de Paul, engaged in mortification of the flesh, and kept their eyes downcast. This is wonderful and praiseworthy, but it's only imposed upon those who freely joined that order. It is right and profitable to do works of piety that are not commanded, but it is only to be imposed upon people in a way that is conducive to piety, not in a way that is burdensome. This is the Catholic Church's position on the matter. I am a Catholic. Here I stand. I can do no other.